How far can a person run before the past finally catches up? The question hangs in the frozen night air above Miller's Crossing as lanterns flicker along the main street, and the townsfolk gather beneath strings of colored paper lights to welcome the new year. Emily Carter stands at the edge of the crowd, shoulders slightly bent, coat pulled close, trying to disappear into the cold. Noah presses against her side, his small hand wrapped around hers, his eyes bright with the innocent excitement of fireworks and music. She smiles for him, even though inside she feels the familiar edge of fear, the restless instinct to vanish before anyone can look too closely. 6 weeks. That is how long she has been here. 6 weeks of quiet work at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. 6 weeks of carefully chosen words, lowered eyes, and polite nods. 6 weeks of avoiding questions, of keeping her story small and simple. And still the whispers found her. They always do. Tonight the whispers become voices. The clock nears midnight. Children laugh. Musicians tune their fiddles. Church bells wait to ring in the turning of the year. Then Victoria Caldwell steps forward with the poise of someone accustomed to control, her winter cloak lined with fur, her eyes hard and certain. She does not raise her voice at first. She doesn't have to. Silence gathers around her like snow falling. Emily feels it before she fully understands, the way conversation dies and bodies shift aside until she is no longer invisible but exposed in the raw center of the square. Victoria's words are sharp, wrapped in the language of morality and civic duty. She speaks of decency, of families, of the town's reputation. Then, with calm precision, she turns those words into a knife and names Emily, a young woman with no husband, no family, a child born out of wedlock, a stranger who brings shame into decent company. The accusations fall like church bells striking too loudly. Emily's breath stumbles in her chest. Noah looks up confused, tugging her hand as if to anchor her. She wants to shield him, to fold the world away from his hearing, but her feet refuse to move. Leaving now would be proof. Staying feels impossible. The crowd stands frozen. Some faces are curious, some embarrassed, some quietly satisfied. The New Year's music fades into a long, aching pause. Emily feels the old instinct surge, run, leave, vanish before the first stone is thrown. But she cannot tear Noah through the hostile silence. So she stands, trembling, and waits for the judgment to finish its work. Then a voice cuts through, calm, steady. A man's voice that does not shout, but does not bend either. Jacob Miller steps out of the crowd like a steadying hand appearing in the dark. Dust brown coat, hat tipped low, a man who minds his own life and lets others live theirs. He faces Victoria without heat, without insult, simply stating what he knows to be true. Emily has harmed no one. She works, she cares for her child. And no gathering, no tradition, no self-appointed guardian of virtue has the right to strip a woman of her dignity in front of her neighbors. The crowd shifts again, unsettled. Someone coughs, someone murmurs. Victoria tries to tighten her hold on the moment, speaking of standards and the slippery path of tolerance. But Jacob does not move. He does not argue theology or politics. He simply stays between Emily and the storm. And in that simple refusal to step aside, something changes. People look away, ashamed of their silence. Others judge him as fiercely as they judge her. Emily feels Noah's hand shaking in hers and realizes she is breathing again. Jacob does not reach for her. He does not act like a hero. He does not make speeches about chivalry or charity. He only stands and refuses to let the woman beside him be erased. Midnight comes anyway. The bells ring, slightly off beat, echoing across the dark plains. Fireworks bloom like brief prayers above the rooftops. People cheer because they are supposed to. But beneath the noise, the moment lingers, fragile and powerful. Emily looks at Jacob only once, uncertain, grateful, undone. For years she has learned to shrink herself, to accept that shame is stronger than mercy. Tonight, for the first time, someone refuses that story. And in the quiet that follows, as the town resumes its celebration and the cold air bites her lungs, she realizes something dangerous. She is tired of running, yet danger remains. Victoria's gaze promises there will be consequences. The crowd may disperse, but judgment will not sleep. Rumors will grow teeth. Doors will close. The cost of staying will rise. Emily knows this all too well. Still, when Noah tugs her sleeve and Jacob nods once, politely, before stepping back into the shadows, she feels the faintest shift inside. Not safety, not yet, but the beginning of something steadier than fear. The new year arrives over the wide Wyoming plains, bringing with it the first fragile thread of defiance, of love that dares to exist beyond the rules, and of secrets that refuse to stay buried. Emily senses the path ahead will be hard, maybe harder than anything before. But tonight, under the crackle of fireworks and the tremor of her still beating heart, she stands her ground. And that alone is enough to change everything. In the days after New Year's Eve, Miller's Crossing keeps moving, but Emily feels every look like grit beneath the skin. She still changes linens, scrubs floors, and carries trays at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. Yet each step outside feels different now. Some townsfolk nod out of habit, then catch themselves as if remembering who she is supposed to be. Others tighten an arm around a child's shoulders when she and Noah pass, a small protective motion that lands harder than any shouted insult. The words Victoria threw into the winter air have settled over town like dust, showing up in lowered voices, cut-off conversations, and the way people never say her name, only that woman. Emily has watched this pattern roll over 3 other towns. It never stays quiet for long. Her old routine wakes up inside her like a reflex. Count the money, measure what can be sold, chart in her head how far they can travel on what little they have. Leaving now would be simple. No leases, no promises, no one to say goodbye to. Yet when she lies awake at night, listening to Noah's soft breathing and the faint clatter from the saloon down the street, she doesn't see a fresh road and a new main street. She sees Jacob standing beside her in the square, shoulders squared against the town's stair, refusing to move. That single image presses against the familiar urge to run until, for the first time in years, staying feels like more than just a foolish wish. Jacob appears the way weather does on the plains, not on a schedule, but steady enough that a person can start to count on it. Every few days there is a knock at the back door. He stands there with his hat in his hands, snow clinging to the brim, boots leaving a clean line of melted water on the floor. He brings things that are easy to explain: potatoes, beans, a sack of feed for Mrs. Henderson's chickens, a jar of peaches from his cellar, always acting as if he had more than he could use. One evening he pulls a small wooden horse from his coat, its body rough-carved, legs a little crooked. For a heartbeat he looks almost shy, until Noah grabs it with both hands and gallops it across the floor, laughing so hard he can barely breathe. Jacob's shoulders loosen. He smiles, then drops to one knee to fix the loose hinge on the pantry door and move on to the next small repair, as if that was the real reason he came. He talks with Mrs. Henderson about fence lines, feed prices, and the way the wind tears shingles off his barn roof. With Emily, he is careful, almost gentle in his restraint. He does not ask why she came here, what she did before, or what sins people think they see when they look at her. He does not mention New Year's night unless she does. His kindness arrives without speeches, without conditions, without even the light pressure of a favor being kept on some invisible tally sheet. At night, staring up at the cracked ceiling, she waits for the catch that never comes and is startled by how much comfort she takes from the memory of his quiet knock. Victoria works by a different rhythm. She no longer needs to raise her voice. The town is already tuned to her pitch. Some mornings she arrives at the boarding house with neatly tied bundles of used clothing and loaves of bread for anyone who might be struggling. She hands them to Mrs. Henderson in the front parlor while several boarders sit with their coffee, ensuring she has an audience. In a velvet-smooth tone, she praises the boarding house as a pillar of the community, then wonders aloud how fragile a house's reputation can be if the wrong kind of talk attaches to it. She never says Emily's name. She doesn't have to. Her eyes flick once toward the hallway where Emily stands with a tray, and that is enough. Once, as Emily passes the doorway, she hears Noah's name and the phrase, "What he grows up thinking is acceptable." The words land like a slap she isn't allowed to flinch from. She carries the tray back to the kitchen, sets it down more firmly than she meant to, and grips the edge of the counter until the trembling in her hands steadies. It isn't just herself she could lose this time. If Victoria convinces enough people that Emily is a stain, there will be no work, no room, no food for her or Noah. The old answer, leave before it gets worse, rises like a familiar ghost. But that answer now means ripping Noah away from the first stretch of days that have felt almost normal, and from the only man who looks at him like he is a blessing, not a burden. The quiet pressure hardens into a choice on a flat, gray afternoon when the sky hangs low and heavy. Emily returns from the general store with a small sack of flour and finds Victoria waiting at the boarding house steps, cloak smooth, a dark carriage standing behind her like a period at the end of a sentence. Noah presses closer to Emily's side. Victoria smiles with practiced politeness and asks for a word alone. On the narrow porch, she draws a fat envelope from her glove, and Emily knows what it is just by the weight of it in the air between them. The money, Victoria explains, would be enough to carry Emily and Noah farther west, to a place where no one has heard their story, where the past can't cling quite so easily. She calls it an opportunity, not a bribe. She talks about simplicity, about sparing the town further division, about giving Noah a chance to grow up without scandal attached to his name. For a moment, Emily can almost feel that old version of freedom. Boarding a coach, stepping down in a new town, enjoying a few months of anonymity before the questions begin again. Then Noah leans into her leg, and she catches sight of the crooked wooden horse peeking from his coat pocket, and the picture shifts. In a low, steady voice, she asks what will happen when the next woman arrives alone and afraid. Will there be another envelope waiting for her, or only a door slammed in her face? The warmth drains from Victoria's expression, leaving something colder and sharper behind. She warns Emily that refusal has costs, and that Jacob's name will sink alongside hers if he continues to stand in the way. Then she presses the envelope into Emily's hand and leaves her on the porch, as if the matter has already been settled. It hasn't. The envelope sits in the center of the kitchen table all evening, out of Noah's reach, but always in Emily's line of sight. Mrs. Henderson looks at it once, then returns to her washing, offering the only kindness she can: silence. The money could buy distance and time. It could also buy another few years of fear, another string of empty rooms and half-packed bags. Emily thinks of Jacob's calm voice in the square, his simple statement that she had done nothing wrong. She thinks of Noah's unguarded laughter as he drives the wooden horse over invisible hills. When the lamp burns low, she slides the envelope into a plain wrapper and asks Mrs. Henderson to send it back. On the front, she writes 3 words: "Thank you." No. Her hand shakes, but when she lets the packet go, the air feels a fraction lighter. Jacob senses the shift before anyone explains it. At the feed store, conversations dip when he gets within earshot. Men who used to joke with him now keep their talk bland and safe. A rancher who had all but agreed to buy a young bull suddenly wants to wait and see how things shake out. No one mentions Emily, but her presence is there in every careful pause. A few evenings later, he rides into town and finds Noah on the boarding house steps, the wooden horse racing along the railing. Emily stands in the doorway, tired around the eyes but unbent. They talk first about the cold, about Mrs. Henderson's aching joints, about the wind tearing at barn roofs outside town, as if that is all either of them cares about. Then Jacob looks at her and asks, very simply, "Are you staying?" The question is soft, almost casual, but it lands like a stone dropped into deep water. No one has ever framed it like that before. Every town has assumed she will leave, and she has always agreed with them. Now she thinks of Noah sleeping without nightmares, of mornings that do not begin with planning an escape, of the way Jacob stood between her and a circle of hostile faces and never once looked ashamed of it. Fear still moves through her. Habits built over 4 years don't vanish in 4 weeks. But there is something else layered under it now, slow and hot. The anger of someone who is tired of living like a sin that needs to be hidden. She tells him she wants to stay, but does not want his life burned down because of her. Jacob turns his hat once in his hands, then says that a man owns his choices, and he would rather be right and broke than comfortable and wrong. The quiet certainty in his voice eases a knot she hadn't realized she'd been tightening around her own heart. Victoria will not let the returned money go unpunished. The town is not finished deciding what to do with Emily Carter. Somewhere ahead, Emily can feel a reckoning coming, something louder than whispers in a parlor or envelopes on a table. But as Jacob mounts up and rides back toward his ranch, and Noah stands on the steps waving until he disappears into the dark, she understands that, for once, she has chosen where she will be when that reckoning arrives. Under the hard Wyoming sky, with a quiet cowboy at her back and a small boy clutching a crooked wooden horse at her side, she decides that whatever comes next will not find her vanishing between towns. It will find her here, in Miller's Crossing, standing her ground. The summons arrives like thunder on a clear day. A notice pinned to the church door, then read aloud at the general store, then repeated in kitchens and barns until everyone knows. There will be a special community meeting at the town hall. Attendance encouraged. Purpose: preservation of moral standards. No one says Emily's name, but she feels it in every syllable. By the time the sun drops behind the hills, unease has seeped through Miller's Crossing like a slow-moving fire. Lamps glow in the narrow windows of the town hall, and horses stamp restlessly outside. Inside, benches fill quickly. Men sit with stiff backs, women with folded hands, and children are nudged toward the rear wall to whisper quietly or not at all. Emily sits near the aisle, Noah tucked against her side. Jacob sits one row behind, close enough that she can feel his steady presence like a hand at her back. Mrs. Henderson is there, chin lifted. Daniel Brooks leans forward, forearms on his knees. A hush spreads when Mayor Collins stands, clearing his throat as if every word is a weight. He barely finishes the opening remarks before Victoria Caldwell rises, cloaked in certainty. She thanks the mayor for his courage, then begins to speak of decay, of the dangers of permissiveness, of the way small compromises turn into large disasters. Her voice carries easily. She never trembles. When she finally gestures, subtle, precise, toward Emily, the last layer of pretense falls away. Emily's lungs tighten. The urge to run pulses through her body. She glances at Noah, who watches the grown-ups like someone trying to read a language he hasn't learned yet. She realizes this moment will become a story he carries, whether she speaks or not. Silence stretches. Then Jacob stands. Not quickly, not dramatically. Just stands, as if the ground has demanded it. He talks about work done honestly, about a woman who has harmed no one, about the cruelty of judging a person based on fear instead of evidence. His voice doesn't shake. He doesn't ask permission. He refuses to look away, even when a few men shift in their seats, discomfort rippling through the room like wind through grass. Victoria responds with smooth logic. Children need clear examples. The town's reputation matters. Boundaries protect the innocent. For a moment, it feels like an argument that could go on forever, each point answered with another. Then the mayor asks, gently, almost kindly, if Emily would like to speak for herself. The room stills. Emily feels Noah's small hand tighten around her fingers. She rises. Her heart hammers so hard she thinks it might shake the words loose before she can form them. But when she looks at the rows of faces, some sympathetic, some cold, some carefully blank, she remembers living without a voice for too long. So she begins, not with excuses, not with apologies. She tells the truth as cleanly as she can, about loving Mark Turner, about the promises that shrank to silence, about discovering she was pregnant and then finding herself alone. She describes the first town where the whispers arrived, then the second, then the third. She talks about fear, about the constant packing and unpacking, about waking in the night to listen for danger and the sound of footsteps outside a window. She does not cry. She does not beg. She only asks that people see her as more than a rumor. She says she knows judgment may never leave her, but she will not let it define her son. When she finishes, the room does not move. Even the stove in the corner seems to hold its breath. Emily sinks back down, as if the confession has taken the strength right out of her bones. For a heartbeat, she believes that nothing has changed, that truth is just another vulnerability to be used against her. Then Jacob steps forward. He stands in the open space between benches, hat in hand, eyes steady. He says he has listened to enough talk of contamination and shame. He says the only thing shameful here is the eagerness to cast stones. Then, without raising his voice, he tells the town that a man makes his life by the choices he claims. And he chooses Emily. He turns to her and says her name with a quiet certainty that fills the room. He tells her he wants to build a life with her, not out of pity, but out of love. He speaks of Noah as though the boy is already his, a gift to be cherished, not a stain to be hidden. And then he does the unthinkable in a hall filled with watchful eyes. He proposes marriage. The word hangs there, bright and impossible. A few people gasp. Someone drops a hymn book, and it hits the floor like a gunshot. Emily stares at him, stunned. Fear surges first. Fear for him, for what this will cost. But it runs headlong into something deeper. Something that has been quietly growing since the night he stepped forward in the square. She whispers that she does not want to ruin his life. Jacob answers that a life built on silence and cowardice would not be worth keeping anyway. Mayor Collins looks as if the room has tilted beneath him. He reminds them that marriage is a serious step, not a shield against rumor. Pastor Andrews rises then, voice calm, and says there are worse reasons to marry than love and truth. Mrs. Henderson nods fiercely. Daniel Brooks lifts his hand and says the town is not one woman's kingdom, and he will not help crown fear as its ruler. Not everyone agrees. Some people leave, muttering. Others stare at Emily as if trying to measure whether this boldness is bravery or defiance. But the current has shifted. Emily feels it like a change in wind direction across open prairie. Her heart steadies. She turns fully toward Jacob and, for the first time, lets herself want something without apology. In a voice barely louder than a prayer, she says yes. The word is small. The echo is enormous. Noah climbs onto Jacob's knee, clutching the crooked wooden horse as if sealing the promise himself. The meeting does not end in applause or harmony. It ends in uncertainty, in argument, in tension that will take time to unravel. But as Emily walks out into the cool night, Jacob at her side, she realizes that whatever comes next, she will not face it alone. And that realization is more powerful than fear. The stars burn clear above the dark Wyoming plains, as if witnessing a line being drawn at last. Between judgment and mercy, between running and standing still, between love that hides and love that dares to be seen. The wedding happens without trumpets or lace. Just the sound of boots on church floorboards and the soft cadence of Pastor Andrews's voice rising beneath the wooden beams. Winter still clings to the air, the sky pale and wide, as if the world itself is paused between seasons. A few rows of benches are filled. Mrs. Henderson in her best shawl, Daniel Brooks with soot still under his nails, several ranch families who choose kindness over conformity. Others stay away, or pass by the church doors with polite distance, pretending they don't notice the ceremony inside. Emily stands beside Jacob with folded hands, Noah clutching the crooked wooden horse like a talisman. She does not wear silk. She wears the one good dress she owns, pressed carefully the night before. Yet when Jacob looks at her, as if this moment is something holy. She feels more seen than she ever has in her life. Pastor Andrews speaks simply, without flowery words or warnings, as though love is something that doesn't need embellishment, only truth. Jacob vows to protect, to honor, to choose her every day. Emily vows to stop running. When the promise settles between them, quiet but unbreakable, Noah slips his hand into Jacob's, and the shape of their family is sealed. The kiss is brief, shy, unexpectedly tender. No one claps. Instead, there's a small silence that feels like reverence. Then life moves forward, as it always does, indifferent to ceremony. They leave the town behind and ride out to Jacob's ranch, where the open plains stretch like a worn quilt and fences run as straight as a man's conscience. The house is simple, 2 rooms downstairs, an attic loft above. But sunlight warms the windows, and the wood has been repaired by steady hands. Emily breathes it in like fresh water. Until now, her homes have been places to pass through, never to claim. This one feels different. It smells of cedar, faint tobacco, and the lingering comfort of coffee on the stove. There is space for Noah to play, a small bed tucked into the corner for him, and a cradle that Jacob repairs long before there is any reason to need it. They settle into a rhythm the way music settles into a steady beat. Mornings begin with roosters and coffee, with Noah's footsteps pounding across the floorboards, with Jacob heading out to the barn while Emily learns the land, the way the wind moves, the way the sky shifts moods without warning. She cooks, mends, and tends to the small garden that will bloom when spring finally breaks through the hard ground. At night they sit by the fire, Jacob reading old newspapers aloud while Noah falls asleep against Emily's side. But peace does not mean safety. Word spreads that Jacob Miller married the woman from New Year's night. Some ranchers quietly end their business with him. A cattle purchase evaporates. A neighbor who once waved each morning now rides past with a tight nod, as if friendliness itself might be considered suspicious. Prices rise in subtle ways. Work becomes harder to find. Jacob doesn't complain, but Emily sees the numbers tightening like a drawstring. She tries to take in sewing to help stretch every coin. She also sees the weight creeping into Jacob's shoulders, not shame, but the burden of knowing others would let a child go hungry to prove a moral point. Victoria Caldwell remains polite and silent, which is somehow worse than open hostility. People follow her example, not with overt cruelty, but with an absence of warmth that chills more deeply than winter wind. Still, love grows in this barren season. It grows in the way Jacob teaches Noah to brush a horse, patient and careful. It grows in the way Noah begins to call Jacob Pa without deciding to, simply because the word fits. It grows in the way Emily and Jacob move through the house together, passing each other in the kitchen, brushing hands, speaking softly when the world outside feels too loud. They do not live in a fairy tale. They argue sometimes, over money, over pride, over the question of when to push back and when to let things go. But every argument ends with the understanding that they are fighting for each other, not against. Spring comes, then summer. And one quiet evening, Emily tells Jacob that another child is coming. The news is spoken in a whisper, half hope, half fear. His face softens instantly, and he pulls her close as though protecting both mother and unborn child, with his arms alone. From that moment forward, every hardship has a new shadow. Worry. Will this child enter a world that welcomes her, or one that treats her birth like another scandal? Emily remembers the loneliness of her first pregnancy and vows that this one will be different. This child will be born inside love. Work remains scarce, but Jacob refuses to fold. He offers labor where he can, rides longer, works later. Emily learns to do more with less, never letting Noah sense the concern beneath her calm voice. But Noah notices anyway. Children always do. One evening he hands Jacob a small tin of coins he's been saving and says it can help buy feed. Jacob swallows hard and says the boy should keep it, though everyone knows the gift has already done its work simply by being offered. Then, as if the sky tires of holding back blessings, change arrives. A rancher from another county hears of Jacob's honesty and hires him for a long fencing job. Word spreads that the Miller Ranch still stands, still produces, still lives with dignity. The boycott weakens because most men cannot afford to pretend. The wind shifts, slowly but unmistakably. And in late autumn, under a sky the color of wheat, Lily is born. The birth is hard, and for a terrifying hour Jacob sits outside the bedroom, head in his hands, while Mrs. Henderson, summoned like a guardian from town, works beside the midwife. Then a cry breaks through the air, sharp and full of life. Jacob enters the room with trembling hands. Emily lies pale but radiant, Lily bundled against her chest, small and perfect and fierce. Noah stands at the foot of the bed, awestruck, as if the world has just doubled in size. Lily's arrival stitches them even more closely together. The town whispers again, but the tone has changed. Some women begin sending small gifts, a knitted blanket, a jar of preserves. Words like blessing replace words like scandal. Even Victoria's power dims under the steady work of time and the quiet example of a family that refuses to break. 2 years pass. Victoria leaves the valley for reasons whispered but never confirmed. With her departure, a tension slips from the town's spine. Emily makes friends, slowly, carefully. Jacob's business stabilizes. Noah grows into a thoughtful, protective older brother, guiding Lily across the yard with the solemn pride of a small guardian. And though life remains simple, there is a fullness to it that money cannot measure. At night, when the wind moves across the plains like a low hymn, Emily lies awake sometimes and studies the faces of those she loves. Noah dreaming lightly, Lily curled like a warm whisper, Jacob sleeping with his hand resting near hers. She thinks of the girl she once was, running beneath winter skies, and understands how far she has come. Love did not erase hardship, it did something braver. It gave her the strength to stand inside it. Years slip forward like wind over the plains, steady and unhurried, carrying change without asking permission. Miller's Crossing grows, just a little. A new storefront painted bright white, another row of houses pressed against the edge of town, a schoolhouse roof repaired and gleaming beneath the mountain sun. Children's voices ring through the yard at recess, their laughter traveling farther than the church bell on Sunday mornings. And there, at the front of the small classroom with its slate boards and rows of worn desks, stands Emily Miller. She writes carefully with chalk, sleeves rolled, hair pinned in a simple knot, her voice calm and steady as she recites history lessons and spelling words. To the youngest children, she is simply Mrs. Miller, the teacher who listens, who never raises her voice, who believes every mistake is just a step toward learning. The older ones know more of her story. So do their parents. But time has smoothed the edges of gossip into something quieter, something almost reverent. They no longer talk about scandal. They talk about survival and mercy and the strange, stubborn power of love. Jacob rides into town most afternoons, tying his horse outside the schoolhouse to wait for the day's lessons to end. He stands in the shade, arms folded loosely across his chest, watching children spill out like marbles rolling across a tabletop. Noah, taller now, walks beside Lily, who carries her books as though they hold secrets too precious to drop. They head down the path toward home, toward chores and supper, toward evenings by the fire when Jacob reads old papers aloud, and Lily falls asleep halfway through a paragraph. Noah works beside his stepfather now, learning the rhythm of land and weather, serious and steady, his loyalty as natural as breathing. He still keeps the crooked wooden horse in his room, a silent witness to the night everything began to change. Emily's first day as schoolteacher had not come easily. The town board met, the way they always do, to discuss qualifications and reputation and proper standards. But this time the room did not divide along old lines. Daniel Brooks spoke first, saying he trusted her judgment as he trusted the tools in his hands. Mrs. Henderson added that a woman who had survived the worst of judgment would know better than anyone how to treat a child fairly. Even Mayor Collins admitted that a town as small as theirs could not afford to waste anyone willing to serve. There were hesitations, of course, but there were also nods. And in the end, the vote passed. Emily accepted the position with quiet gratitude, though her hands trembled when she signed her name. She never imagined she would become someone children looked up to, someone trusted, someone whose presence meant safety instead of suspicion. Years earlier, she had walked through this town with her eyes lowered, afraid of every glance. Now, when she crosses the square, people greet her by name. Not everyone becomes a friend, but nearly everyone becomes kinder. A widow waves from her porch. The grocer sets aside a bag of apples for the Miller kids. Men stop Jacob to ask advice on fencing or breeding. It is not a miracle. It is simply time and witness doing what sermons rarely can. People have seen that the story they once feared has grown into a family that works, that loves, that harms no one. They have seen that their worst predictions never came true. Victoria Caldwell is remembered only in quiet conversations, her name soft as dust. Some say she meant well, others don't bother to guess. All agree that the town feels easier without a single voice deciding what is morally acceptable for everyone else. Even so, traces of her legacy remain, like faint tracks in old snow. Every now and then, when a stranger arrives in town, a few cautious glances still linger too long, but more often than not, people catch themselves and remember. They remember Emily, they remember Jacob, and they choose a different path. On the anniversary of the New Year's night confrontation, the town gathers in the square for fireworks and music. Children crowd around the bonfire. Lily claps along to fiddles, her hair catching sparks of light. Noah stands beside her, tall now, sturdier than the boy who once hid behind his mother's skirts. When the clock nears midnight, Emily feels a familiar flutter in her chest. It is not fear anymore. It is memory. Jacob threads his fingers through hers, the simple act grounding her to the present. They do not talk about the past, but it is there in the warmth between their hands, in the steady beat of their hearts, in the life they built one small day at a time. In the schoolhouse, Emily keeps a small stack of essays in the desk drawer. They belong to her students, but they are also testaments to something larger. One child writes about how courage means standing beside someone when others won't. Another writes about how mistakes shouldn't last forever. Emily never asks who they mean. She simply corrects the grammar, smooths the page, and tucks the paper back with care. The message is enough. Eventually, word spreads beyond Miller's Crossing that the town schoolteacher once arrived here alone and afraid. That she married the quiet cowboy who stood beside her. That together they raised 2 children and rebuilt trust where there had once been only suspicion. Some travelers are surprised to see her welcomed so openly. Others nod, as if such endings make sense out here beneath the wide western sky. At night, when the house grows still and the only sound is the wind moving through the grass, Emily lies awake listening to Jacob's breathing and the soft rustle of Lily turning in her sleep. She thinks about every road she took, every town she fled, every doorway she entered with her heart shielded tightly behind quiet eyes. She thinks about the moment Jacob stepped forward in the square and the way her life pivoted on that single act of courage. And she understands something simple, something she will carry with her always. She did not survive because the world suddenly became kind. She survived because she chose to stay, because one man stood beside her when it mattered, and because, little by little, a town learned how to forgive. The years ahead remain unwritten. Trouble will come, because trouble always does. But now, when she faces it, she will not be alone. She will stand with Jacob, with Noah, with Lily, with neighbors who have learned the cost of silence. And somewhere inside her, the frightened girl who once ran from town to town finally rests. The wind softens at the close of the day, and the world seems to exhale. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the quiet story tucked beneath the louder noise of life. The story of a woman who believed she had lost her place in the world, and of a town that believed it had the right to decide her worth. Over time, those beliefs unraveled. Mercy stitched the pieces back together. Love, steady and unadorned, taught everyone to breathe a little easier. Emily walks home from the schoolhouse in the late afternoon light, her children's laughter swirling around her like warm dust. Jacob's easy footsteps just behind. The sky spreads wide and pale above them, welcoming, forgiving, endless. Nothing is perfect. Nothing ever will be. But hearts have softened, and walls have lowered, and once closed doors now stand ajar. In that quiet space, healing lives. And as the day fades into dusk, the last image lingers gently, like a whisper at the edge of sleep. A family standing together against the horizon, at peace with who they are. And finally, belonging. End of article. Good night.